Previously, in historical Formula One campaigns, we reviewed the story of what was one of the most memorable seasons in recent years. How can we deny it when we had different controversial winners, an amazing battle, and a title that was decided in the last meters of the last race of the year? But now, today's chapter makes us jump several years ahead in time, and possibly position us from 2008 to the year 2021. The year the big circus would witness one of the most controversial, fierce, spectacular, and surprise-filled seasons in the category's history. One starring two driving geniuses and two innovative teams that quickly made this become a battle of doing whatever it takes to achieve their goals. Ladies and gentlemen, it's time to open Pandora's box and reminisce about the year when Max Verstappen and Lewis Hamilton took the aggression, the controversy and tension to levels that had not been seen in the big circus for years. So ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Chapter 2 of Historic Formula One Campaign Season 2021. The 2021 season was filled with unexpected events. Mercedes dominated Formula One, winning both the Drivers' and Constructors' Championships. From 2014 to 2019 and 2020, it was a total walk in the park for them. There was no one who could dethrone the Germans. Ferrari had attempted in 2017 and 2018 but fell short against the mighty German team spearheaded by their driver, Lewis Hamilton, who in 2020 achieved his 7th world title, equaling Michael Schumacher and becoming, statistically speaking, the greatest driver of all time. Originally in 2021, we would see the birth of the new technical regulation, one where the cars would be significantly different and where now the big star would be the return of the famous ground effect. However, the 2020 global pandemic forced the delay of this regulation's introduction until 2022, making 2021 a continuation of 2020, and where many thought that, simply and plainly, it would be another season of dominance for Mercedes. But that was going to change because even though the regulations would mostly remain the same as in 2020, the Fédération Internationale de l'Automobile changed some things, which were a direct hit to the great advantage that Mercedes had at that time. Because small changes in the flat bottom resulted in a 10% loss of the aerodynamic load that the cars had, and where those with less elevation in the rear were going to suffer. A phenomenon known as rake, and those cars whose rake was more pronounced were going to see this loss of aerodynamic load reduced. And that's where the second protagonist of this story comes in, the people from Red Bull Racing, who in 2020 were the second force of the World Championship. In fact, they managed to snatch some victories from the Germans, and generally, Verstappen was the pursuer to the point that he fought for second place in 2020. After progressing in car development and being less affected by the technical change, with Honda providing a powerful and reliable engine, a Red Bull was expected that could be much closer to Mercedes. Additionally, Alex Albon, Max Verstappen's teammate in 2019 and 2020, was replaced by the more experienced Checo Perez. After convincing Red Bull with his strong performances throughout the season and his victory at the Sakir Grand Prix, he secured a seat on the team. So the Bulls had a duo with experience and talent. A fast car and a strong desire to end the reign of so many years in the big circus. This would lead us to Red Bull and Mercedes being on the verge of embarking on the biggest battle they would have in their history as Formula teams. No one was even prepared for what was about to happen. And the weekend of the 26th to the 28th of March would begin one of the biggest battles in the history of Formula One. And a season that none of us will forget. So welcome to the first round of the Formula One World Championship, the Bahrain Grand Prix. After a short preseason, Bahrain would host the clash between a young, talented man and the virtuoso genius seeking to amass an unrivaled number of titles. In Formula One, Mercedes was the favored team to win this Grand Prix, and for good reason. A few months ago, they had only qualified being a second faster than the rest of the teams at the British Grand Prix. But surprise, would Max Verstappen say enough? In Dutch, he surprisingly snatched pole position from Lewis Hamilton, taking almost 4/10 from the Brit, showing the great form of the Bulls for that year. As we've often said, A good qualification is pointless if not followed through on race day. And they would have to go out and do just that on race day. Verstappen defended well in the extension, but a neutralization would quickly come. Because just a few curves after the start, Nikita Mazepin went and crashed into a barrier, making one of the worst debuts in Formula 1 history. The race resumed shortly after the incident. And except for an initial attack from Hamilton, Verstappen was able to control the initial stages and not give the Brit a chance to attack with the drag reduction system. A stability that ended when Mercedes brought Lewis Hamilton into the pits on lap 14 to undercut Verstappen. At this point, the Red Bull driver's advantage was just 1.8 seconds, risking the loss of the lead with a bad stop. Or if Hamilton simply pulled out the hammer time on this outlap. It was expected that Verstappen would stop immediately after, but they decided not to do so and stopped 3 laps later, coming out with medium tires. But now with a 7-second disadvantage against Hamilton, which originally seemed like a strategic error by the Austrians. Despite the compound differences, Verstappen was steadily narrowing the gap and getting closer to Hamilton's car. The difference between the two fell back to 1.7 seconds. Mercedes played the undercut again to protect their driver's win. Verstappen stayed on track 10 laps longer than Hamilton, opting for a different strategy. But it was during this new hunt that the first controversy of the season would begin. Red Bull was reporting over the Dutchman's radio that Hamilton was using the runoff area of turn 4 to gain time by going off the track limits. The team promptly reported the situation to the Fédération Internationale de l'Automobile, as this body oversees qualification. They were very strict with limits, especially at turn 4. And with this claim, they were looking for Hamilton to stop doing it and thereby lose some time. Verstappen pitted on lap 39, fitting the hard tire, aiming to finish the race and gain an advantage over Lewis. But he would still have quite a few laps to try to cut the distance and go for the victory of the first Grand Prix of the year. Coming out just under 9 seconds from the pit, ready to go on the attack, and lap by lap, Max was aggressively making up time. Red Bull's claim to the Fédération Internationale de l'Automobile was successful because race direction informed all teams that from the moment of their announcement, the claim was in effect. The drivers could no longer use the turn 4 runoff to gain time, and Hamilton would have to stop doing it and gaining an advantage from it. With 5 laps left, the gap was 1.3 seconds. One wrong move and Verstappen was going to go on the attack like a lion on the Brit. On turn 10, Hamilton locks up, allowing Verstappen to get within drag reduction system range. A Verstappen who on lap 52 doesn't think twice and attacks the world champion. He couldn't on the first attempt, but tries again on lap 53, and now the result would be totally different. Difficult maneuver, but he manages the overtaking and Verstappen takes the lead of the Bahrain Grand Prix, not knowing that soon the smile would be wiped off his face. Hamilton reported over the radio that Verstappen overtook him outside the curve, going beyond the limits. Mercedes reported Verstappen's action to the Fédération Internationale de l'Automobile, who instructed Red Bull that he had to give up the position. He does it reluctantly, but he has 2 more laps to try to take the lead of the Grand Prix, but not getting such a clear opportunity again. And when lap 56 arrives, Max would have to watch as Hamilton took the first round in this fight between the two. This is where the controversy comes in, as it was soon known that Hamilton had been constantly using the escape route of turn 4. In fact, one person counted and he went off 29 times, clearly exploiting this opportunity. So, you may ask, why did the Fédération Internationale de l'Automobile decide that Verstappen should return to position and Hamilton was not given a single reprimand for his constant departures? Well, here 2 different factors come into play. The first is that the Fédération Internationale de l'Automobile decided to be strict with track limits for qualifying, eliminating the times of those who used the runoff area. But for the race, they were not going to monitor the limits as strictly, leaving their use at the discretion of the driver. Red Bull reported it during the race, and the Fédération Internationale de l'Automobile subsequently prohibited its continued use. For these reasons, Hamilton was not initially sanctioned. But then why did Max Verstappen have to give up his place? Well, the Fédération Internationale de l'Automobile's explanation was that one thing is allowing drivers to use the escape route, and another, very different, is overtaking by going off the track. Verstappen took all four wheels off, and that, by regulation, was prohibited. Hence, they had to give back the position. And maybe, just maybe, if Red Bull hadn't asked the drivers to stop using the Turn 4 runoff, would they have had an argument to defend themselves and not have to give the position back to Lewis? But the what if doesn't exist, and in the end they had to settle for being second and watching Hamilton win the first Grand Prix of the year. The rematch would have to be made in Italy, as the second date of the World Championship would be at the legendary Enzo Ferrari circuit in Imola. Hamilton and Verstappen were expected to have another close battle, but Hamilton took pole this time. Surprisingly, his companion would be Sergio Perez from Mexico. Verstappen would start third, but the weather was set to return, making the Emilia-Romagna Grand Prix a different race. The rain had fallen, and the stretch would be on a wet floor. Ready to give us a pretty crazy round 2 of the World Championship. Verstappen overtakes Checo Perez to secure second place. At Tamburello, he lines up with Lewis Hamilton and strangles him in turn 1, successfully taking the lead of the Grand Prix. With Hamilton second and losing part of his front wing but surviving in the second position, forced to hunt down the Dutchman. And this intense start would be neutralized by 2 accidents, one of Tiffy colliding with Nikita Mazepin and another by Schumacher, who lost the car during the safety car. And after a few laps, the Grand Prix restarted. Hamilton attempts to overtake on the Tamburello curve but fails, opting for a more cautious approach compared to the race's initial lap. But in a single lap, Max extended his lead to 3 seconds over Hamilton, who initially faced difficulties. However, the gap between the two soon stabilized as both drivers waited for the track to dry enough for slick tires. But close to that window where the drivers would have to make the switch, Hamilton began to cut time off the Dutchman, making it for lap 27. After evaluating some cars that had already switched to dry tires, the Red Bull team would take a gamble doing the same. The move worked out well. Hamilton stopped a lap later, and the slow pit stop allowed Verstappen to maintain the lead of the Grand Prix. And this would turn the battle back into a chase of the British driver after the Dutchman, desperate to catch up and take the first place in the competition. This until Hamilton makes a very gross mistake. For wanting to quickly get rid of Russell's Williams. He ends up losing control of the car, damaging his front wing and losing many positions. Luckily for him, George Russell and Valtteri Bottas collided hard moments later, forcing a red flag. And with that, his team was able to repair the car while it was neutralized and minimize the loss of positions. And at the end of the red flag, the race now for Hamilton was about making a comeback, trying to at least reach the second place, and one by one he would overtake all the drivers he would face. He achieved the goal, but Verstappen got the revenge. And now the Grand Prix victory was his, leaving the battle for the World Drivers' title very tight. These two races made it clear how evenly matched this World Championship was going to be. Lewis Hamilton won the next Grand Prix in Portugal and Spain, while Verstappen won in Monaco. Making the positions in the drivers' and constructors' tables, Max Verstappen leading with 100. Hamilton leads with 105 points, followed by Red Bull, trailing Mercedes by a single point in the constructors' standings. No race in that World Championship had been boring, and it was only the prelude to what was about to happen. By this point, Red Bull and Honda had introduced updates, resulting in a car slightly faster than Mercedes after Monaco. an advantage they would need as two circuits were coming up that were totally beneficial for the Germans, Azerbaijan and France. The sixth round of that championship would be on the Baku Street circuit in Azerbaijan. A circuit that in years prior to this test had been characterized by being chaotic and giving dramatic races.
And precisely that year would not be the exception, and the drama and chaos would come directly with the qualifying test.
Thing-wise for Lance,
Stroll! Through crashing, and he just locked up on that front left. And once again, no margin for Lewis Hamilton. We've got Yuki Tsunoda and a red flag, so Yuki Tsunoda.
This disaster had once again left Charles Leclerc with a pole position, as had happened in Monaco. But in that Grand Prix, he couldn't compete due to a failure before the race started, which deprived him of a golden opportunity to win his home Grand Prix. But once again, he had the opportunity to start from pole position. And precisely Hamilton and Verstappen were behind, ready to give us another battle between these two. The Grand Prix started quite calmly. Hamilton defended his second place, Leclerc the pole, and Verstappen was a bit more cautious at this start. But Leclerc's pole would only last 2 laps, as Hamilton would quickly become the leader of the Grand Prix. And in 8 laps, Leclerc was overtaken by Verstappen and then by Checo Perez. However, the British team struggled with car balance in that Grand Prix. And he couldn't make a big difference to the 2 bulls that were coming behind him with full intention of beating him. And that was the tone of the first laps. Verstappen remained within 2 seconds of the 7-time champion, compelling the German team to make an early pit stop. Pitted on lap 11 to undercut and protect position. But as had been usual in the season, a slow pit stop. And the Red Bull team took advantage of this to position their 2 drivers first and second when they came out of the pit box. Now the tables had turned and Hamilton was the pursuer and Checo Perez and Max Verstappen were the ones being pursued. The move was a disaster. To win the Grand Prix, Lewis now had to overtake the 2 bulls on the track. But they wouldn't have an easy task. The RBA's top speed made it impossible for Hamilton to overtake Checo Perez despite his best efforts. Lap after lap, even within drag reduction system range, Hamilton couldn't pass Perez and as a result couldn't chase Verstappen. Lap by lap was the tone and it seemed that nothing was going to change in that regard until lap 31. The Ancestral. He has an accident under very strange conditions as his tire blew out in the middle of the straight, sending him to the wall at a very high speed and causing the safety car to appear. This had given Hamilton a chance at the restart, but after this, things would remain exactly the same as Lewis was unable to overtake Perez on the track. And as the laps go by, everything seems to indicate that nothing could prevent the double win of the Bulls and the victory of Max Verstappen. Until, with 5 laps to go, the 14th place, Valtteri Bottas hits Red Bull Verstappen. Verstappen is...
Just hit Max Verstappen, gentlemen, with 5 laps to go, and Checo Perez,
The same problem that Lance had was replicated in Verstappen's car. From a comfortable lead in the Grand Prix, he ended up abandoning the race just laps away from securing the win. Under normal circumstances, this accident should have caused the appearance of a safety car and the race to end under those conditions, with Checo Perez as the winner, but in a way that I genuinely still don't understand why. The Fédération Internationale de l'Automobile decided to declare a red flag, and with that, a standing restart would be required. And this could give Hamilton the opportunity to win a Grand Prix that until a few moments ago seemed totally lost. In addition, all the drivers who were behind would have the opportunity to score good points in this final sprint. Obviously, all the pressure was on Checo Perez because he had to defend the first place. And as I told you, everything was going to be played in a start. Only 2 laps. Hamilton makes a grave error, accidentally touching a steering wheel button, causing the brakes to fail and lock up in the turn, sending him off the track. With that, the chance to win and regain the lead in the World Drivers' Championship. With this automatic action, Checo Perez was left alone at the top, who, upon crossing lap 51, would win the Azerbaijan Grand Prix and take his first victory with the colors of the energy drink brand.
Thank you for finishing that off for us. Great job.
For the Bulls, the damage was minimized by Checo. For Mercedes, things were about to get very ugly, as Red Bull now clearly had the fastest car on the grid, with which they won the French Grand Prix. They dominated the Styrian Grand Prix and repeated the dose at the Austrian Grand Prix. There were 3 victories for Max, who managed to build a 32-point lead against his main pursuer, Lewis Hamilton, and that put him with a quite considerable lead. Lewis and Mercedes simply and plainly could not respond in the last 2 Grand Prix, which were a thrashing from the Dutchman. Things were clearly tough, but for Silverstone, Hamilton's home, Mercedes planned to introduce an upgrade package, with which they hoped to turn the tables and get back in the fight for the title. And Verstappen and Red Bull knew that if they beat the Germans at Silverstone, they would hit their rivals where it hurts the most and obviously extend the lead they already had. A very exciting Grand Prix was coming, without either of them knowing that this British Grand Prix would revolutionize this battle, and where things would never be the same again. That British weekend would also be the time for the birth of the controversial sprint races, an experimental format, where now the format would change. Fridays would be taken up by a free practice. Then there would be a qualification that would define the order of the grid for the sprint race, and then the aforementioned would be a 100-kilometer competition whose result would define the positions for Sunday's race. The classification left Lewis Hamilton snatching pole position from Verstappen, directly boosting his confidence. Saturday would bring the first sprint, and with Verstappen and Hamilton 1-2, indicating that another huge battle between the two was coming. Sprint, it's lights out and away we go, and I think
Verstappen got
a better
start than Lewis Hamilton, and
Hamilton is already ahead with Valtteri Bottas pressuring his teammate. Bottas dragged Hamilton down to the first corner. Now he's trying to break the slipstream into Brooklyn's corner. Hamilton will not get around the outside there because it's too tight. Hamilton attempts to overtake Verstappen on the outside using the slipstream, but Verstappen maintains his lead.
crowd roaring the
That duel on the first lap was beautiful, but short, as Lewis, during the 17 laps of that Grand Prix, would never again have such a clear opportunity as he had on that initial lap. He was defeated at the start, and in that battle, Max won the first duel, striking the British on his own ground. So now Verstappen would have the pole position for Sunday's Grand Prix, having the balance in his favor. Because, as I told you, he knew that a victory would be a moral and very hard blow that he would have to jump. Lewis Hamilton had to avoid at all costs the place that defeated him. And that was about to unleash hell on earth between the two of them. The start would be very even. Hamilton pressured Verstappen in the initial meters, getting parallel on Wellington Straight, but Verstappen defended exceptionally in Brooklands. Although Hamilton comes out better traction from Lewfield, he gets parallel on the Old Finish Straight and in the Cobbs Curve. Everything in a minute goes straight to hell. Hamilton tried to overtake Verstappen in an extremely risky and optimistic way, causing a very hard hit to his title rival. He sent him into the wall at over 250 km per hour, taking him out of the race and causing a red flag. Hamilton was lucky to survive that hit, and Verstappen was lucky not to have serious injuries after that violent accident. This caused a red flag to try to extract the driver as safely as possible, and clearly to fix the barriers that were heavily damaged after the incident. But Hamilton's move was hugely questioned by several fans, some even accusing him of having done it completely on purpose. The official Formula One networks were on fire, some saying it was a racing incident and others calling for Lewis Hamilton's disqualification. And during that red flag, the team radios communicating with the race director were quite intense. Red Bull demanded a severe penalty for Hamilton, claiming it was intentional, while Mercedes fought to prevent this outcome.
Yeah, Michael, look at that corner. He was never anywhere near alongside. Every driver who's driven at this circuit knows you do not stick a wheel up the inside of Cobbs. That's a huge accident, and it was 100% Max's corner. So, as far as I'm concerned, who should never have been in that position? Could you had a big accident? Thank God he's walked away unscathed, so I hope you're to deal with it appropriately. I'm just a question, that's...
Why it's just gone up now that things have calmed down for a second is under investigation by the Shepherds. Go ahead, Toto Michael. I just sent you an email with the diagrams where the car should be. Did you receive that?
Toto, I don't access my emails during the race deliberately because I'm concentrated on the race.
You should review the new rules that are being released as they may be relevant. Toto, you can go upstairs and see the stewards if you'd like.
However, after a few minutes, the Fédération Internationale de l'Automobile issued its verdict. They would impose a 10-second penalty on the British for causing a collision. A penalty that many considered a joke, claiming that at the very least, he deserved disqualification for having taken out Max Verstappen. Well, the race obviously resumed, this time with Charles Leclerc winning. Hamilton was required to serve a 10-second penalty at his next pit stop. Hamilton stopped on lap 28 to serve the penalty, which relegated him to 4th place. Forced to climb back in 20 laps to victory, which would serve to reduce Max Verstappen's lead. One by one, he would mercilessly overtake them. With 2 laps to go, Leclerc and Hamilton were battling for victory again, and at that same point where Hamilton sent Verstappen into the wall, Hamilton tried it again. And with a good overtaking, he snatched the dreams of glory from the prancing horses people. Hamilton won the Grand Prix despite the initial contact with Verstappen and the penalty. He dominated on his home turf, deducting 25 points from Max in a single move. While Hamilton and the Germans celebrated joyously, Pandora's box had been fully opened. The victory exposed the leniency of the sanction, and the criticisms aligned with that revelation. How was it possible that Hamilton took a rival off the track and only received a 10-second penalty that ultimately did not take away his Grand Prix victory? And a large part of the fan base was still calling for Lewis Hamilton's disqualification. Red Bull and others bombarded the Fédération Internationale de l'Automobile with statements all week that Hamilton deserved a greater penalty, and implying that his move was with the full intention of taking him out. But the Fédération Internationale de l'Automobile defended its decision to only give Hamilton a 10-second penalty. These maneuvers are judged based on the incident itself, not the consequences. And they found no evidence that Hamilton's maneuver was intentional. The official Fédération Internationale de l'Automobile document states that Hamilton, he was responsible for the maneuver as he didn't have the position secured and could have taken more space on the inside to avoid the collision. However, they found no convincing proof that he acted intentionally. However, Red Bull kept pushing and pushing to the point that they even sent Alex Albon, who was their reserve driver at the time, to do a test at the Silverstone circuit mimicking Hamilton's trajectories, to prove that it was impossible, that it wasn't on purpose. This was actually presented as new evidence for the Fédération Internationale de l'Automobile to reopen the case. But the body immediately rejected it, claiming that Red Bull did not show new evidence, they simply and plainly fabricated it. Mercedes issued a statement with a direct jab at Red Bull, saying that with the Fédération Internationale de l'Automobile is ruling in their favor, they hoped that the orchestrated attempts by Red Bull to tarnish the sporting integrity of their driver would end. Things ended there, but from this point on, nothing was going to be the same again. Just a few weeks later, the final round was scheduled to begin. Before the summer break, the last appointment before the break was in Hungarian lands. Mack remained the world leader, but the aggressions and tensions that both would carry on track were about to reach a new level never seen before between the two. In that Grand Prix, during qualifying, both Mercedes drivers demonstrated an impressive and surprising pace, securing the top positions on the grid. But there was also controversy because Hamilton slowed his pace throughout the entire last installation lap of Q3. And although both he and Verstappen could try for a last record, Perez would be left unable to set a time and improve his first established chrono. However, on Sunday the weather changed before the competition began as rain fell on the circuit, wetting the asphalt. And where we would have a start with wet ground and a start in the wet, it always has a high risk of turning into a slaughterhouse. The cars went out in the tricky conditions, but quickly Boots was about to reignite the controversy. In a bad move, Bottas had taken out Lando Norris, Checo Perez, and Max Verstappen. Bottas and Lance Stroll emerged with a bowling player mentality, eliminating 5 drivers between them, just in the first turn. Perez, to Verstappen, to Norris, to Ricciardo, and to Charles Leclerc. Lewis Hamilton was lucky not to be affected by the hit, and with both Red Bulls injured, it was his great opportunity to score points again in this fight. But this contact had caused a red flag to appear, and those eliminated by this hit were Lando Norris, Checo Perez, Lance Stroll, Bottas, and Charles Leclerc. Max was lucky to survive, but the flat bottom of his car was quite damaged. Finishing the race under those conditions would be a titanic task. And obviously there was no shortage of people accusing Valtteri Bottas of doing this on purpose. Many users on social media began to theorize that Bottas had done this with all the premeditation possible. Some suggested it was an explicit request from Toto Wolff to secure his renewal at Mercedes for the next season. Was he risking losing the seat to the promising German driver George Russell? But this is not the important thing. The important thing is what would come next. Because after the red flag, the track had dried up quickly. But all the cars on the grid took the formation lap with intermediate tires and quickly realized that everyone had made a mistake. Thus, it was anticipated that all cars would skip the formation lap and start from the pit lane to switch to dry tires. All drivers pitted except Lewis Hamilton and Mercedes. Would they stay on the grid? Giving us the most XD moment in the history of motorsport. I don't need to explain the seriousness of Mercedes' strategic mistake. All the cars were on dry tires. Except our visionary geniuses, Hamilton had to pit at the end of the lap. And with all this, he fell behind the others. Esteban Ocon leads the Grand Prix, with Sebastian Vettel's Aston Martin in second and Latifi third. This may seem like a joke, a virtual 2021 F1 round, but trust me, it was an entirely real moment. With the car at full throttle, Hamilton would face the daunting challenge of regaining all lost positions and securing a Grand Prix win, with the entire race ahead. Meanwhile, Beth and Ocon battled for the top spot on the Hungarian Grand Prix podium. Hamilton began overtaking his opponents one by one, inching closer to a possible victory. By lap 32, Hamilton was already 5th, and the threat of him positioning behind Sebastian Vettel's mirrors was quite real, while Ocon continued to resist Sebastian's attack. He craved the victory he hadn't tasted since the 2019 Singapore Grand Prix. But if Hamilton kept advancing, both were going to end up succumbing and neither of them would achieve the victory. At this point, Alonso was the next target of the Brit. And the Spaniard and Alpine knew they had to delay Hamilton as much as possible, or that first victory would slip through their fingers. It was time for Hamilton and Alonso to relive 2007 with an amazing battle between the two. Now,
Hamilton forces Alonso to defend in the way Nico Rosberg said that he should be doing, but still trying to go around the outside. Alonso stays ahead in this turn, but 2 brake later. This will continue for 4 more turns. This time he's on one side, and I think they might have touched there as well. Hamilton had to back out.
Fernando's defense was beautiful and perfect. He didn't allow Hamilton to overtake him from any side, and with that, he was gaining valuable time for his teammate Esteban Ocon. But on lap 65, Alonso locks the brakes on turn 1, allowing Hamilton to overtake him. But the job was already done. With 5 laps remaining, Hamilton needed to overtake Carlos Sainz to secure the victory. And that would make him lose enough time for Esteban Ocon to win this Grand Prix. And by the time lap 70 arrived, the Frenchman was winning on the Hungarian circuit and for the first time could be called a winner of the
Formula One.
Hamilton finished 3rd, which became 2nd place after Sebastian Vettel's disqualification, who did not have enough fuel at the end to be able to do a test of it, and therefore his 2nd place was taken away from him. Lewis regained the lead in the World Drivers' Table. The blow from the boots, which nearly eliminated Red Bull, severely damaged the relationship between Red Bull and the Black Arrows. The rivalry had already dynamited the peace between Hamilton and Verstappen and Red Bull and Mercedes. he didn't return that season. And the second half of the year would be a struggle that would expose the best and worst of a team, who wanted to retain the throne and the one who sought to knock him off his pedestal. And I repeat, no one was prepared for what was about to happen once the summer break was over.
Thank you.